Oh, it looks like I got no hair. Oh, all right. Yeah, that's how it's gonna go. All right. Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing all right. We'll get started here in just a sec. Today we are working on game design for interpretation. It's gonna be all right. We gotten as far as internal economy and representative tokens and roles. So the vision for today is to pick it up kind of where we left off, and then while we are kind of simultaneously getting our thoughts together on skill demos and stuff like that, we'll get started on just trying out maybe some kind of an initial game design for your Interp as well, so you can have that as another thematic point kind of option in your toolbox, so to speak, for staffed Interp. Games are, of course, also awesome for non-staffed Forest Interp as well. So today's going to be a pretty short kind of lecture-y part just to finish up the game design stuff, and then we'll get into the more interactive bits of it. Before we get back into the PowerPointy stuff that's nobody's super energized by, does anybody have any questions about game design? Or again, we're still working kind of simultaneously behind the scenes on skill demonstration stuff. Any questions or announcements for the good of the cause before we jump in? Okay, cool. Let's get back to it. So we've been talking about, just as kind of a reminder, what are some of the basic hallmarks of a game? And this idea that there's going to be a lot of game-like things in interpretation and in social media and in marketing and in just everywhere you look, things are being gamified these days. Even stuff with the GameStop stock circus that has been the past couple of weeks, with the very gamified approach to Wall Street and the United States Stock Exchange through apps like Robinhood and so forth. They use game-like elements and feedback to make something that is stressful and intimidating, like investing in stocks for people who have a little bit of cash to do that, a lot more approachable and easier to learn because it shortens up those feedback cycles in a much tighter loops of information back to you, the player of the stock market. Okay, cool. So we kind of left off around the representative tokens and roles. So just as a reminder on that one, representative tokens are the things on your game board or the playing space when you are setting up an interpretive experience using a game or game-like or gamified structure. You want those to look and act and feel and sound and be named like the things they are representing in your game. You want to have the mental translation as easy as possible for people. So if there are fish in your interpretation, maybe you're talking about fly fishing and you're working your way up to a skill demo with an actual fly casting rod and some hand-tied flies, stuff like that. A little bit later on, you can help folks kind of understand the interplay of the fly fisher versus, you know, the prey that you are trying to trick and convince to get hooked on your line. You can help folks understand that in a much more interactive way through a game than just kind of like telling them about fishing. Okay, so maybe your fishing game looks a lot like fishing, and there are maybe some, you know, fish-like tokens or cushions or little fish icon counters on a board, or whatever it is. A million different ways you could do it, of course, but make sure that the tokens represent what, like, obviously represent what you need them to in your game. And you, as the interpreter, you are assigning roles to people playing these games. Make those roles named as some functional act or some piece of the thing that you are interpreting, so that it makes sense to people. Like, there's an old saying, doing something in a way that doesn't make sense is like dancing about architecture, right? We want to avoid dancing about architecture. We want to use game roles in ways that make sense to people, so they can instantly start getting on board with you and get into the game, and be focused on the game and what you're interpreting, again, instead of like everybody staring at you confused, or staring at me confused, because we're leaving them behind, having to do too much, again, mental translation with that. Okay. And at all points throughout this, we talked about how you, the interpreter, you are leading the experience by shaping the gameplay. You are modifying the premise of each round, if that's a useful or practical thing. You're speeding the game up, you're slowing it down. Maybe you give folks permission to repeat a round if the group is genuinely trying to grasp what you're putting out there in the game, and they're just, they're struggling to get it a little bit. It's okay. Give them a little bit of extra breathing space. Play a fourth round in a 3-round game to let them, kind of safely try out some different choices, some different strategies and tactics, like we talked about on Monday. So at every step, in every way, you, as the interpreter, you are shaping the experience by modifying things. So you set the rules of the game, you set the mechanics of the game. You can also change or break those rules as the interpreter, solely and expressly for the purpose of advancing the interp, bringing people in, helping folks have a good time, helping folks kind of relax and enjoy, and so on and so forth. Okay. So hopefully everybody here has, looking at taking college classes or even high school classes, if you had a good teacher back in the day. Can you think of a time when you had a teacher or professor, they had sort of lesson plans for the day or for the lab or whatever? I do this a lot on summer camp, where the plan was to do things A, B, and C, and for whatever reason, the weather on the field trip wasn't working right, or the lab exercise you're doing in chemistry class had to be kind of modified on the fly in some way. Maybe one of the reagents was contaminated, or they have more sodium bicarbonate than sodium carbonate. And so they're just, they're swapping things in and out, so that the time isn't wasted, so that the focus that you work so hard to create with your people is not lost. In 220, if you've taken that class with me, we'll take that class outside as often as we can, specifically in this way, to get people to get off of the autopilot track and be present and focused on whatever it is we're talking about in 220. And we'll make things a little bit more interactive instead of just talking to people. And that's gamified mildly. It's subtle, but it's a slightly more gamified version of a class session, for example, than just another lecture, right? We're all lectured out. Okay, so one of the most important points across this whole set of PowerPoint slides, that I'll post for you online, is you have permission, you have the right, and in a lot of cases, you have the need to modify your game on the fly as it's going to improve some aspect of it. Okay, you'll get more of a sense for that as we go, once we actually get to start practicing these games that you guys are going to be designing. All right, so the underlying madness to the method of modifying your game on the fly is going for flow. So performance psychologists, researchers like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whose own name rhymes with itself, I think that's great, was researching this idea of flow. So it's peak state performance. And if you've ever taken any rec classes, this is something that comes up often in those, especially at the graduate level. So it's when the challenge level is just right for each of the players. They're kind of surfing right at the skills that they are enjoying or picking up or honing through your game. And it's not quite so hard, the challenge isn't quite so steep or stiff to overcome that people just go, you know what, forget it, this is too hard, there's no point in finishing this is ridiculous. And it's not so easy. It's like, okay, we get the point of this, can we just like move on to the next thing? This is maybe a little bit too cutesy. But that sort of that Goldilocks middle space in between those two extremes, two unhealthy extremes, the performance psych people might call that flow, among other things. And you can, in longer games, you have to kind of change the progression of the game a little bit. Progression, again, is the changes in difficulty or approach throughout the game, such that the beginning of the game plays, looks, feels a little bit differently than the end stage of the game does. And flow is a very, very positive thing. It's a very satisfying thing to go into. So if you are interpreting fishing, if you are interpreting, one person was talking about like, pets that you have. If there's something you do with that animal, like you train your animal to do performance or like working dog type stuff, that sort of thing, you in that moment of that training or that performance, you're probably in something like a flow state, and it's generally a pretty good thing. Okay, so think about the things that you enjoy doing, and think about, okay, so what kind of a game could I put forth relative to my topic that I think I could help people hit a flow state, even just for a moment, give them that sort of intense and satisfying experience throughout even just a 2 to 5 minute long game, right? We're not talking about a huge thing, a big production you got to do. As you start to get better and better at this kind of stuff, you can help folks buy in, so to speak, pretty quickly, even in the course of a few minutes. Okay, so last couple of slides here. So we want to we're not really going to worry about this so much on the first draft of our game designs, and I'll take you through what the game design is going to look like. It's I went ahead and like templated it for you, and I got some industry templates that folks use in like professional game design, so you can kind of fill in some blanks and not have to invent games from whole cloth. But at a later step, we're going to focus a little bit more on presentation than we are on design, meaning that everything sort of looks and feels consistent, and everything has a clear connection within the game to the thematic point that that game is representing, and also to the larger overarching theme of your interpretive topic. Okay, so that's going to be sort of the look and feel, the polish. You want to couch your interactions, even as you are using those 3 sentences, 30 seconds to explain your game's rules and mechanics. The tone of your voice, the inflection, how you're saying those rules, you're cueing your participants on, is this like an exciting game, like super high energy level, high speed, that sort of thing? Is it more of a mysterious kind of game? Is it going to be frantic and frenetic? People, again, are looking to you. You are modeling, just like we started at the beginning of our 5-point outlines. You're modeling appropriate, safe behaviors as the leader of the interp. You're also modeling the expectation before folks even get into the game of what that game session, that 2 to 5 minutes, is going to be. Okay, so you want your interactions to support and reinforce and give a lot of clues about the game. That's a more subtle thing. So again, this is kind of second draft kind of stuff. As you're putting this in your notes, maybe add that as a sidebar. But this is why we don't use rubber chickens in chess. And we don't use cream pies to the face for, you know, like escape rooms or something like that. Like it just, there, you know, cream pies to the face have their place in slapstick comedy. And if your game isn't about slapstick comedy, then you would leave that out, right? As obvious as that is. Sometimes in the first pass of the design phase, you got a bunch of cool ideas, and some of those ideas end up making it through a first revision, even as the revision is sort of taking your game in a new, tighter, better direction. Sometimes that rubber chicken kind of stays in. So basically, we're going to spend a couple of weeks later in the semester playing each other's games that you design and helping each other find the rubber chickens and the cream pies that are fine on their own merit, but they just don't fit. They don't make sense. Okay, so be consistent, be thorough and consistent throughout. All right, next idea here. If you are wondering, okay, so how do I format my game for Interp to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, to have that sort of sense of progression? A researcher named Booker has put together a list of 7 sort of fundamental or basic plots. So these apply to movies and to, you know, books. Not that anybody reads books anymore, but yeah, whatever. These days, games that have any sort of a narrative, you know, Last of Us, Mass Effect, the Halo series, all of that sort of thing. They have, you know, arcs and plots, so character arcs, that sort of thing. And you might think about, what kind of a plot off of this list could I use for any particular game? So here are 7 basic game plots. Overcome the monster. That's the plot of Star Wars, right? Vader is a monster until he's not. Spoiler alert at the very end. We're not going to talk about the sequel trilogy because that whole trilogy was a monster in itself. Completing the quest, to get charged with some imperative, and then the protagonist has to go do the thing, complete the quest. So the old Indiana Jones series, if you grew up watching that, is like that. Nicolas Cage movies, I think we're going to steal the Constitution, is a complete the quest kind of a thing. Very commonly, complete the quest type games have a focal object like the Constitution, or in super old times, like before any of us were born, the Maltese Falcon is a plot device, a physical object called a MacGuffin. The next basic game plot would be comedy. So a funny game is typically, because it's benign violation, but it's 2 to 5 minutes of benign violation formatted as a game instead of a story. It's going to be a series of misunderstandings, kind of round by round, or somebody else's pain. A tragic game sets up the players or the players' characters for some kind of a fall. And the tragedy happens when you can kind of see the fall coming, and then it happens. And maybe you as the player, you have a sense of this onrushing dread, and then, gosh, what have we learned from this tragedy of a game? It takes a lot of skill to harness a tragedy into a game in Interp. So for those of you who attempt that this semester, I salute you. So temptation to vanity or greed leading to a fall, for example, would be a very common tragedy kind of a plot in a game. The next of the 7 basic game plots is Rebirth. So a transformation type story. So Snow White, like the actual original old Snow White, more so than like the Disneyfied version, is a rebirth story, straight up. And that can be a very satisfying thing for people who are looking to understand something that is complex or difficult to understand in the context of your interp. If you adopt kind of a rebirth arc, you know, the focus point of the game changes and is reborn as something else, usually something better or more desirable, okay? Also, there's the rags to riches plot for games. And obviously the rags to riches plot maps onto resource or point accumulation games. Everybody starts out with the same fistful of dollars of Monopoly, and somebody goes from that paper rag play money to having all of the paper rag, the riches within Monopoly. And then the most powerful one, but one of the less common ones, so this is our last of the 7 base game plots, is going to be one called the hero's journey. And you could get an entire master's degree or PhD on the hero's journey and what all that means. But the basic idea here is that a lot of the old sort of classic, enduring thousands of years myths and legend stories are very much hero's journey stories. So if you want to take a different perspective on Luke Skywalker or Rey or Ahsoka Tano, if you're a Clone Wars fan, The Mandalorian, Westerns or sci-fi Westerns like The Mandalorian show right now, often adopt a hero's journey kind of arc. So everything is normal, and then there's this call to adventure, and the reluctant hero goes to the dangerous world and goes through a series of trials, confronts ultimate evil, usually has to make some intense personal sacrifice, typically dying and getting resurrected or something like that. And then through doing that, they beat the bad guy, they retrieve the thing, and they bring it back, whatever this new knowledge or value is, they bring it back to the regular world from which they came. So that's the hero's journey. It's a very circular kind of cycle, and it's one that shows up over and over and over. Something like half of the top 100 best performing movies of all time follow that template very specifically, and you can just watch it sort of unfolding scene by scene. It's a pretty cool thing. But again, there's way too much of that for us to get into in a forestry class for one tiny chunk of our semester. So overcoming the monster, completing the quest, comedy, tragedy, rebirth, rags to riches, and the hero's journey. 7 basic game plots, okay? So if you have no idea where to start with a game, pick one of those that sounds interesting to you and maybe relevant to a topic that you're thinking about interpreting, and we'll go from there, okay? So you use that arc to set up your game, and then you identify the emotion typically that is associated with that particular arc. Like rags to riches feels like an accomplishment kind of story. Like we started at rags, and it sounds like it's more fun to be at the riches phase. So we're going to go from there to there. And what's the emotion that people are experiencing as they reach riches having started at rags? The answer to that question is kind of where you start filling in the details about your game. So you want to identify the favorite moments, sort of the key moments, typically the climax of the game. Then you want to identify, what's the emotion correlated to that? And from there, ask yourself, okay, so what game mechanics help me get people from wherever we're at to that particular emotional response? And then let's use those game mechanics to trigger that correlated emotion and deliver on that favorite moment, okay? So again, happiness, fear, misery, dread is the sense that I know something bad is about to happen to my character in this game, and I have a pretty good idea of what it's gonna be like. And then horror is the moment that you tip from the anticipation of the bad thing happening to watching the bad thing happening, okay? All just different emotional states. So figure out what is best for your particular game. All right, so today, let's take a couple of minutes to kind of throw around some ideas for different games. So this is gonna go pretty much like the other day's conversation on skill demonstrations. Just identify for us or with us one of your chosen topics, and the expectation here is not to have a game ready to go. This is much more of a everybody helping everybody ideally, and hopefully not just me talking at you, with some ideas about, okay, so you could have a game with A, B, and C to talk about topic X interactively with your visitors, and they might even have a pretty good time doing it right. Okay, cool. So let's hear from you guys and gals, either in chat or turn your mic on and let your classmates know what your topics might be. And then we'll start throwing around some game ideas. Okay, we'll help each other through this sometimes intimidating part. So what are some of your topics that you guys and gals would like to interpret this semester? And we'll help you start interpreting or designing games to help interpret it. Designing games is more fun once we start designing them. So any volunteers? What's a topic? We'll help you design a game around it. Using a TQ. Logan to the rescue. All right, so what's a TQ? Tourniquet? Okay, so you can imagine that there might be some safety issues with turning tourniquets loose on a mixed audience without any medical background necessarily. So let's bat around some ideas for not just like practicing tying a tourniquet, right? That would be more of a skills demonstration by itself. But what might be a fun way to introduce ideas of a tourniquet? So for those of you who don't know what a tourniquet is, it's a pressure-based loop where if you've got an arterial wound and you are leaking blood at high speed, so your blood pressure is dropping, you would tie a strap or sometimes like a belt or 550 paracord or shoelace or strong cloth in a loop upstream of where the wound is, and then insert some rigid bar or something like that and winch that arterial flow closed. And there's a bunch of sort of medical details about where exactly to do that and how long you have once that's done, and can you relax a tourniquet briefly to reperfuse the downstream limb or what have you. So it's basically just a way to staunch like immediate life-threatening blood flow if somebody's poked a hole in their brachial or femoral artery. I can't kick my leg up that high. All right. So a game on something like that might be lassoing something using a hondo knot. It could be any particular part of the process for tying a tourniquet. So for example, in order to tie a tourniquet, you have to have at least 2 parts other than the victim's body, excuse me, like what you're gonna tie the tourniquet and what you're gonna use to winch it shut. So maybe like a scavenger hunt type game, and you might turn folks loose around a given area like, okay, so what do you spy with your eyes that could be used as a tourniquet without actually tying any tourniquets yet? We'll practice that maybe later together, but a scavenger hunt game just to help people understand, you know, in a situation where you would need a tourniquet, you've probably got a good up to 30 seconds maybe to get something. So it's got to be something immediately to hand. And if you're not highly prepared like Logan is with a properly kitted out first aid and trauma kit, then you're going to be using a shoelace or a belt or somebody's shirt or whatever, okay? Because that is a life-threatening emergency. Other ways we could turn tourniquets into a game. What's a way that we could have a competitive game? So a scavenger hunt is kind of everybody for him or herself, and usually the impetus is exactly a race against everybody else. Okay, we could see who could tie a tourniquet the fastest. See against, you know, using like a tree trunk or something like that, like safely tying a tourniquet against a tree that we're not going to injure. You could against springy branches or trunks like bamboo or a thicket of something. You could see who could turn the tightest tourniquet to re-emphasize that, yeah, you're really gonna have to crank down on this thing. And the answer to that is not always the biggest participant. It's the smartest one who's got the longest lever. So you as the game facilitator can kind of trickle hints out to different competitors in a competitive race-like or competition format on that, okay? What's a zero competition, purely cooperative game that we could use to illustrate the tying of a tourniquet, where we have to work together in order to do the thing? So this won't totally blow your mind or anything, but races can also be cooperative. So a relay race where everybody's on the same team, and the challenge is to get the MacGuffin, the plot object of the game, into the hands of the first responder so that they can tie the game's tourniquet. And yeah, I think that is a pretty intuitive thing. Most folks understand what relay races are, right? Cool. Okay. It's a non-staffed game format, so one that you're not necessarily facilitating, but just thinking ahead to things like junior ranger booklets and so forth. What's a non-staffed game that somebody could play by themselves or with a family group, printed in a booklet or pamphlet that we could adapt to tourniquets. Tourniquets are fundamentally loops. Can you think of any booklet type games that have loops or lines to draw? Excuse me. Yeah, scavenger hunt to find the pieces to a tourniquet. Exactly right on. So we're thinking about what's a non-staffed Interp game, something you could play by writing on a page or moving your body around a space or something like that. But you don't necessarily have to have a facilitator or caller present to do that. A lot of Interp happens in a non-staffed way. So with games especially, we want to kind of think along both modes. You're present and you are not present as the interpreter. Put the images into the correct order and tourniquet that would use to put on, like an image scramble. Perfect, exactly, okay. And adults who are familiar with the idea of a tourniquet are gonna sort of cotton on to the idea of the image scramble pretty quickly. And for a kiddo who has never even heard of the word tourniquet before and maybe not know how even to pronounce it, seeing it on a page without hearing it, you know, that game's going to be a bigger challenge for them, but not a bad one, because having that in a game format takes the stress of being quizzed about tourniquets kind of out of it. So if you take a wilderness first responder class, for example, sometimes some instructors will help to convey the thought process of different kinds of wilderness, DX and TX, the diagnosis and treatment. They'll format it as a bit of a game, because we think about games and how to move through them at a very sort of low, sort of hindbrain, lizard brain level. And it's an effective way to help train in the process of what you should do when you're under very, very stressful circumstances and you're undergoing adrenaline reactions. Maybe if you're the one needing the tourniquet, starting to undergo hypovolemic shock. So that's when you don't have enough blood to sort of pump around and keep everything oxygenated and your body starts to shut down. You can start reinforcing the process, the routine, the sequence of it through a game. Okay, cool. Logan, thank you for that that original topic. So we've got a competitive game idea. We've got a non-competitive or cooperative game idea. Both of those would probably be staffed. We've got a non-staffed game idea. I'll just to illustrate that there's a million different ways to, well, metaphorically skin the cat. That doesn't seem particularly animal rights respecting or whatever. So lots of different ways to accomplish your goal as the interpreter with games. Cool. All right, let's do another one. So Logan, take some notes on those ideas. And if you want to use any of those, great. That was free brainstorming for you. You are good to go with those or something else that you decide later on. Anybody else? What's a topic that you are looking at interpreting this semester? And let's brainstorm with you. Let's help you out. Take your time. We're not going anywhere. Is my microphone on? It's hard to interpret a room full of just names like Lapatas and Schultz and Lincoln and Kendra. I have no idea what's happening, and that's fine. Let's see. All right, so without naming any names, we have forestry skills as a topic, so field forestry skills, and some earlier brainstormed ideas for skills demos, which can also pretty easily map onto games like how to throw an axe. Could you see that being formatted into a safe but effective game as well as a skills demonstration? With some balance of team play, maybe you are a team competing in axe throwing with, like, you know, maybe safely for a general audience set of participants with those old school like Nerf foam axes. I have to make sure they're balanced like actual throwing axes, but that could work. Okay. Or how to propagate different plants. That's a forestry skill, or general botany and horticulture skill. So we could build a game or two around how to propagate different plants. Like one player is a base that can accept certain kinds of propagules. Another player is a different base that can accept different propagules. And there's a time challenge to see who can get the right propagules to each base. So maybe we have like an orchard set up out of people, sort of human centipedes. No, that's weird. All right. A game about edible wild plants. We could do that one with some clear caveats, just like with the tourniquets, about actual safety and translating those particular identified species over. Let's see. How about what if you had fishing as a topic, and then as one of the sort of skill demo ideas, selecting the right bait? Like, we could make a pretty funny game involving stink bait, because odors are a benign violation of social norms that everything's got to smell good. That's why we live in a society with Axe body spray for some reason. Okay. Nick writes in chat, edible wild plants, matching game. Show them 3 plants, have them try to find them. Yeah, that works. Another scavenger hunt style game. And again, especially depending on the makeup of your participants, the composition of your participants, not like their face paint. You could make that a solo, like everybody versus everybody competition of who can find the right plants quickly enough. You can make it a team game, especially that works well, of course, with younger kids paired with parents or older siblings and so forth. Yeah. Let's see, native plant ID, leaf collecting, wildflower pressing, avoiding harmful plants. Lots of ways you could do games with avoiding harmful plants, like instead of the floor is lava, the floor is poison ivy, right? Super simple. And you could probably get people going effectively with a floor is poison ivy game in 3 sentences of guidance. So the rules and mechanics, and about 30 seconds of explanation, and then you're off to the races. You go. And you've got the other 1.5 to 4.5 minutes to actually do and enjoy and play the game. Just have some fun with people. Okay. How about, let's see. One of y'all selected tea as a topic and proper brewing for different kinds. Okay. So a tea brewing game, and this could be as messy and water splashy as you want, or it could be a pretty sort of staid, tightly regulated game. But if you've got the opportunity for some people to have fun, you know, splashing a little bit of water at each other while practicing different brewing. So like cannonball tea versus just loose tea leaves in a trap versus, you know, tea bags versus tea tents. Lots of different ways to do it. So maybe they get to select different kinds, try different brewing methods in different rounds of your game. Okay, cool. Plus, brewing tea smells really good, so rock and roll. All right, let's see. One of you guys and gals had birds as a topic and making a bird feeder as a skill demo, which is cool. What kind of games could we have around the topic of birds? Kind of not necessarily a game about making a bird feeder, but maybe a different thematic points, a different stop on the same hike, or different moment in the same campfire chat about birds as a general topic. What might be a game that lends itself naturally to anything about birds? So migration, their habitat needs, their calls to each other. Are there any games you can think of where players have to call to each other? Yes, exactly. Marco Polo. Okay. So Marco Polo, it's a fun like school recess. Do they even still do school recess anymore? But pretty much everybody's played Marco Polo, right? Another one is Red Rover. So Red Rover, send Ellie over, right? And then Ellie tries to crash through the other team's line. And if she does, then the other team loses a player. And if she doesn't, then Ellie joins the opposite team, right? But you can use a game like Marco Polo to talk about the ecoacoustic niches of different species of songbirds in the same space. So for example, if you've got a super loud AC unit on a large commercial building that hums along at a certain pitch, a certain sound frequency, all of the birds that need that pitch frequency or that range of pitches around that frequency, that musical note, that tone, they're going to get drowned out by that thing, and they can't mark their territory acoustically versus other songbirds. They can't warn within their species about approaching predators like maybe raptors, hawks, snakes, the various kinds of snakes that climb trees and predate nests, and so forth. So without having to ever maybe even use the word ecoacoustics or acoustic niche, you can help folks understand, okay, so these songbirds, they're using different songs for different things. In the same way that you and I are a lot better playing Marco Polo without a bunch of sort of Nordic death metal and screamo playing in the background louder than our voices. We can't hear ourselves to play Marco Polo because our soundscape, our ecoacoustic niche is not being dominated by anthrophony or human generated sounds and light pollution. Okay. Red light, green light. That was a fun game as a kid for sure. Get a bunch of people like groin pulling and hurting themselves trying to these monster strides, heading towards the person calling it out. Cool. Okay, so even with just a super wide open topic like birds, and then a randomly chosen set of game parameters like it's a game about the sounds that birds make. It is a staffed interp, and it's got to be simple enough that we can get this going in 30 seconds. Yeah, that totally works. I could absolutely see that happening. Okay, so if you were the student with birds and making a bird feeder as some of your ideas for this class, awesome. Let's play some Red Rover together. Let's play Red Light, Green Light, or Marco Polo. Okay, so you guys and gals kind of see how this process works. It's just knowing your topic, anything about it, and we all know a bunch of games. Let's just pick some games and ideate some games. Okay, let's see whom else. Somebody had survival and backpacking as a topic and tracking and scat ID as a skill demonstration. So we do some tracking and scat field ID in summer camp, for example. If you're taking that this summer, we'll be picking apart some pellets of various kinds as we run across them to see what kind of a meativore or herbivore or omnivore, etc. We're looking at and what that means physically and biologically in the actual scat to help sort of piece together, okay, yeah, this was probably a horse versus a coyote. They look pretty different. We're gonna see a lot of elk droppings this summer on summer camp, lots of elk. I hope we don't see too many bear droppings, but they're pretty obvious when we do find them. For tracking and scat ID as one sort of interesting skill demo around survival and backpacking, what are some games that we could do for track and scat ID? And this is gonna lend itself to some ideas like a matching game, like we slide out a plaster Paris cast of an animal's imprinted track that we've made on a previous hike, let's say. But what other games could we do along tracking and scat ID? So some of the answers to this one will be similar to a species ID game, not using tracks and scat, but acorns or leaves or flowers or recorded birdsong calls. These games tend to go along similar kinds of lines. So what are some games that we could do for tracking and scat ID? And we could get going in like 30 seconds. So here's a slightly less traditional answer for this one. For track IDs, everybody's familiar with how to make shadow puppets, right? So you have essentially a translucent screen and a light source, and then the shadow source in between the screen and your light source. And you could call out coyote and then have a player try to make a shadow puppet of a coyote track versus a bird track versus a what have you. Okay, so track ID is, you can do performance style games like trying to make the shape of the track or be the first to draw the best version of the track as you understand it, versus a visual matching type game, which is very traditional. So matching card game with animal pictures and trying to match it with a picture of the scat. I'm smelling what you're stepping in. Okay, cool. Let's see, what else? Under survival and backpacking, we also have hanging a bear bag. That'd be pretty cool. Danielle writes, a scavenger hunt where you could follow the prints of a certain animal and eventually find it. And Danielle, I love this idea because you could, along that game sort of journey from beginning to end, you could subtly and not so subtly introduce a heck of a lot of habitat characteristics or individual species characteristics before the person actually gets to finding the animal at the end of that search, following the tracks. So we're gonna move through its habitat. Is it wet or dry habitat? And so forth. So like marsh hares, swamp rabbits, you know, they leave piles of their scat at the end of down logs in very specific places in swampy habitats to mark their territory and so forth. Gosh, you could build a whole game around getting from front door of the visitor center to a sort of a staged habitat, so we're not actually disturbing live swamp hares, and helping people get there and see what that is, see what that looks like. For sure, that'd be a lot of fun. And I missed one comment from Nick earlier. Let's see. Talking about the different types of calls that birds make, then have people pair up and try to make the calls. Then the rest of the group guess which call they used. So begging, territory, mating calls, alarm calls. Yeah, I like it. Very cool. So that's kind of a twofer. You get both species ID and the behavior ID inside the species. So, you know, a barred owl territory establishment call is going to be really pretty different than a Swainson's warbler. Both bird species, but wildly different in most respects. Cool. All right, good deal. We're about the halfway point here, so nice work, folks, so far. Go ahead and take a minute or two break. We'll reconvene at 2:04 on my clock, so go ahead and stand up, get your body moving again. Hydrate if you are slumped over on the couch, and get your creative juices flowing metaphorically. That'd be kind of gross and weird otherwise. All right. So while we got a minute or two here, how are you guys and gals doing? This is super weird doing classes online. I hate not knowing that my students are okay. Are you guys and gals doing all right? It's been some crazy weather. I hope you're doing okay. Yeah, you got this. Pour one out for our homies struggling down in, what, Texas? A couple of million people without power and water and stuff. I mean, just the videos on social media lately are pretty nuts. You know, pipes bursting all over the place and so forth, which is, I mean, that's legit. That's a problem. Like if your house doesn't have any power and water is filling up the bottom inch of your first floor from your second floor, that's a genuinely dangerous situation.
In my house, we had to deal with that last night. We had our
Oh,
pipes burst
really?
3 separate spots. One of them right in my face
Ouch.
while I was under there shutting the water off.
Ouch. Okay. No injuries, I hope.
No, it's just a pain in the butt, soaking wet, cold.
Yep.
Good times.
Good times were had by all, I'm sure. Yeah. All right. Actually, one serious side effect of this is I saw that they had to throw out a whole bunch of coronavirus vaccines in Texas because the power was out and so forth. Like it was so cold there, their coal and natural gas power plants are all shutting down. I mean, just crazy stuff.
No, it doesn't help that 23% of their power comes from wind turbines, and half of their wind turbines are frozen. So when you look at 12% of power not being provided, then you'd actually do the math for their population per capita. You're looking at over the actual number they're gone. So 12% is, I think it's in the millions, like 3 millions range, which is how many they have out anyway. So when you take just simply 12% of power not working, that's quite a bit.
That is quite a bit. And wind turbines are used to great effect in Antarctica and central Canada. Like Texans just chose not to weatherproof them. You know, like they work fine in way, way below zero weather when you winterize them, just like anything else, right? I mean, you have to de-ice planes and stuff like that. So it is what it is. But yeah,
Well,
I
I
saw
mean,
they had twice as much fossil fuel capacity go offline. Like their natural gas power generation was especially hard hit. Like that by itself is more than the wind generation they lost.
when you take to the fact that they've never seen this climate like this before and it hits you out of nowhere, I mean, it could have that effect on anybody in any situation. It'd be like if your winter states completely have no winter at all and it's just skyrocketing 100-degree weather. Stuff's going
Yeah,
to malfunction.
yeah. My wife lived in Dallas, Fort Worth about a dozen years ago, and uh, yeah, even just the one winter she was there, like we saw so many fatal pileups and stuff like that. Like they just are not ready. And it's like, sorry, our climate shifting is kind of weakening the jet stream and burping out all this cold air on us. It's gonna happen again. Sorry. So
See, I
no,
made it out of my
welcome
house
to the
in my
north.
I made it out into my rear-wheel drive vehicle, but
Hey, oh,
I
okay.
and our roads aren't plowed at all or no cinder or nothing, but I know how to drive.
Are you outside of Carbondale or where at?
No, I live in Goreville.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So I actually live on the lake, so I'm on the terrible lake roads.
Gotcha. Okay, so that is kind of fun. But just think of all the exciting experience you're getting in driving in poor conditions.
It is quite fun to fishtail in the middle of a road, so.
Yeah, it'll serve you well wherever you end up moving from here for sure. I hear you driving the Challenger, man. Let's see. Let's go ahead and jump back into it. All right, so our next move for today is to take a look at this game design brief. I have that linked in. So I put 2 links in our chat window. And the first is the PowerPoint, which has been up there for a couple days. I'll put links to all this stuff in the course website's announcement section as well, as always, so that you guys don't have to go digging around on the course website. But here are a couple of direct links to first the PowerPoint and then the game design brief. And this is from a game design, a game industry veteran named James Hostetler, who does a bunch of commercial game design, but also like researches how to design games to be effective and stuff like that. So this is a useful tool for us. And we're using it by permission from his resources. And we've kind of gone through and modified it a little bit. And it'll have a couple of questions that we haven't really talked about in terms of designing really sort of any of this interpretive stuff, just to help us think about some of the practicalities of design as well. So, you know, it's all well and good to be talking about, well, my game is, you know, all about the hero's journey, and it's about songbirds in forest habitat here in, you know, the central hardwoods ecosystem. And it's another thing for that very same game to think about, okay, so what's my initial capital investment in this? Like, how much am I going to pay to assemble the materials for this game? Or is this something I can do for free? Is it something I want to do for free using found objects? Because sometimes your time as the interpreter is the most expensive piece versus throwing a couple of bucks at some professionally made resources. Okay, so this game design brief is, I'll screen share it here in a sec so we can take a look. Let's see. There we go. All right, so this game design brief is just a Word document, and it's, let's see, it's 3-4 pages long. But the answers for each of these questions, the blanks are pretty short. So yeah, it's a 4-page long assignment technically, but you're definitely not writing 4 pages worth of stuff. So for just one of your topics and one of any of the bajillion interpretive games that you could kind of harness for that topic, use this game design brief between now and Monday to just kind of get some of your thoughts out onto paper. And if it's a fairly simple and straightforward game, good. That's easy for you to deploy when you are in front of a group of people. If it's a slightly more complex design, good. That can be an interesting and beautiful and elegant and powerfully effective communication tool and relation tool with your participants. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a huge, complex, fancy design. This is just sort of the nut, the core of the idea at the beginning phase of throwing some ideas together for game design. Okay, so read through that and download a copy, fill in the blanks. I'll put in a course Dropbox for the game design brief, and we'll have the opportunity to work with a couple of different games each. So staffed, non-staff games, for example, all of that. We'll use just one copy of the game design brief. You don't have to keep redoing this assignment for each additional game. I think the usefulness is in probably the first use of this, not in repeated use of it. But it does help make explicit a bunch of things that probably you and I both would have kind of as implicit assumptions. So what does your game aim to do? This is a why question. What's the purpose of your game? Why are you using this game instead of any other of the bajillion different possibilities you could in the context of interpretation? Is it supposed to teach the player something about life? Is it just supposed to be a fun joyride, or maybe even a nightmarish hell ride? Is it going to upset the status quo or talk about something deep inside of you, the interpreter? That's a maybe, right? Some of these topics are things we're legitimately excited about. Think broadly, regardless if it's meant to inspire emotion or not. Your game needs to aim, your game needs an aim, or you yourself might feel aimless when creating it. The game is often more easily playable if you know what the point of your game is from the get-go. Okay, so that's the first question for part 2 here, and As you can see, none of it's super technical writing. I don't think you'll have to spend a long time on this particular assignment. But this will help us to think in a very systematic and analytical way about our game before we jump in and sort of potentially get lost in the weeds of what are the specifics of the game. Okay, so what are those 3 sentences that we're going to use as rules? It takes a little bit of crafting to get those 3 sentences exactly where they need to be. All right, so this brief takes us through stuff like, what's your target audience? Is this game one that you could use with all ages, like infant in arms, and mom or dad trying to play this game with you while they're on an interpretive hike, all the way up to like senior citizens? Is your game appropriate for everybody? Right. So some of these races we've been talking about are awesome for high energy kids and potentially legitimately a safety concern for some older participants or mobility limited participants. I think Ashley Judd was just in the news for shattering her femur in 4 places. No, breaking her leg in 4 places. I think she was in the Congo doing some kind of like great ape or something like that rescue, and slipped and fell, busted her leg in 4 places, and it was a 55-hour trip to get her to compound fracture, so like bones sticking up out of her leg. 55-hour journey to get her from the deep jungle down to a hospital in South Africa. And all of that to just remind us that not everybody can play all games. So how inclusive is this game that you got? And your game doesn't have to be accessible to 100% of everybody, because in the real world, as a professional interpreter, you'd have a series of games that you could choose from on any given day, so that you would play a game most suited to school-age children on one day when you got a field trip coming in to your national park or your forest. They're going to spend several hours with you. And on another day, you can interpret the exact same point with a much safer for a wider, sort of more mixed general audience when you don't have a bunch of energetic school kids running around and bouncing off of stuff. Okay, so take that kind of a perspective moving through this game design brief. This is a legit pro level exercise. All right, but it's not intended to be particularly difficult. So if you find yourself kind of bogging down or spinning your wheels, as in Illinois February snow on any particular section, just set that side apart. You can come back to it maybe with renewed thoughts about it before Monday. Okay, so take a look at that. And then the next piece after the game design brief, after you got your head on straight on the game that you want to start with, we'll make several again throughout the semester. You'll have a chance to try out some different things, see what you like, see what you enjoy in terms of game design. Then separately, there's a game design exercise, which is, most years we do this with a partner, but this year is probably more nimble to get that one probably solo for the moment so that we can keep moving forward. And then we'll group up, we'll partner up on the revision stage of games, so that once we're like literally playing games with each other on some of our outdoor labs and stuff like that, we'll find rules that can be worded a little bit differently, a little bit better. We'll find where your classmates will almost automatically be helping you find ways that you could kind of crank up the energy level or kind of bring things down, sort of bring focus back in and stuff like that. And so we'll help each other out, again, almost automatically. It's just some of this stuff is just so obvious when you're playing a game in draft form. Okay, so first game design brief. Then for Wednesday, we'll have the game design exercise due, which is the actual sort of putting pencil on a first draft to paper and kind of just listing for yourself, kind of reminding yourself, what are the primary game design hallmarks? What's your topic, like we've been talking about today? What's the participant type for this particular games exercise? Again, is it for school kids? Is it general audience? Is it probably best for senior citizens? Whatever. And And then what's the theme statement that this game is sort of underneath or a part of? What's a game mechanic that interprets your theme effectively? So what are those 3 sentences? And then pages 4 and 5 are a little bit longer, right? No more than 1 page of explanation highlighting the presence of each of the 6 hallmarks in your game. So does it have a clear victory condition? Does it have a clear central metaphor? Are there representative tokens and roles and so forth? That doesn't need to be a page. This is not really a writing class per se. In fact, if you want to give me just like a bullet point for each of those, sort of mapping each of those 6 hallmarks onto some part of your game mechanic, that's fine. Like, I'm an adult, I'll get what you're tossing me. And then question 5 out of 5, write no more than 1 page of explanation highlighting how your game mechanic effectively interprets your theme statement. A paragraph is fine. I might need, 3 or 4 sentences to kind of understand your thinking and so forth. But if you're doing a good job of mapping a game onto the underlying idea, the thematic point that is reinforcing your theme, which is explaining your topic, then yeah, probably a paragraph is fine. So the guidance here is no more than 1 page. Less than 1 page is perfectly fine. And what we're aiming for here is you could probably accomplish that whole game design exercise assignment on the 1 page that this exercise assignment appears. Okay, so that's a good goal, to keep the content and the effort and time invested sort of sane and true to scale. Because again, this is just a first draft. We're going to tear these apart, rebuild them. We're going to try them out. We're going to iterate a couple of times and so forth. All right, so let the game design brief be your first thought on, so what kind of budget would this game take to really accomplish? It's all just good ideas in your head that don't do any good until we start thinking about the stuff and mapping that out. Is there a free way that I could accomplish this otherwise highly expensive idea and get the same impact either way? Okay, so the game design brief will help you with that. That'll be due Monday. And our game design exercise for a first draft of a first game doesn't have to be perfect, but give me about a page worth of investment into that on the game design exercise for Wednesday. Sound good? Cool. All right, let's close the screen share. And as always, this class is pretty workshoppy. So our next sort of half an hour, the final half hour for our class today, is pretty much to the extent that you want to take advantage of it. A chance for anybody interested to toss a game design idea that you're maybe thinking about out to the group here. And I'm happy to ideate with you like we did for the first chunk of class, just briefly. Okay, so let's go. If anybody is kind of stuck for an idea, like you got a topic and just no inkling of how a game might map onto that, that's fine. Otherwise, this is a pretty workshop portion, and it's a little bit tough to do this through Zoom. So I want to respect your time and say that if you're pretty confident on your game design idea, you are clear for takeoff at this point, and start working on the game design brief first for Monday, and again, the game design exercise for Wednesday. And we'll see you on Monday. But if you want to, let's use this time to get some questions answered together interactively. You don't have to come up with this whole thing yourself, especially if this is your first time designing a game. All right, so open mic, here we go. Would anyone like to kick it off? That's a game metaphor for football, kicking it off. Also, in that same folder where the game design exercise and brief are, I got probably about a dozen video clips from class, like we were talking about the other day, of just examples, everything from board games to outdoor games to quiz games. There's a spelling game, hot potato style game, and most of them are solidly forestry topics. I mean, pretty recognizable stuff. Even with just these short, like 15 to 30-second video clips, you can get a pretty good sense of what the game is and how it connects to forestry and stuff like that. So let those be a creative guide for you, especially if you're feeling stuck on this assignment. Okay, you got lots of resources available to you to grease the skids. Oh man, it's a shipbuilding metaphor. You're not actually greasing anything, unless that's part of your game, but that would be weird. All right, would anybody like some help on a game design? Now's your chance. Otherwise, again, you're free to take off. Ellie asks, will I be recording and posting this lecture? Absolutely. I still have Mondays to upload as well with all the storm stuff. Our internet's been pretty terrible at home, so I come into the office here and we'll use the university's fat T1 or T3 pipe, whatever it is, to upload several gigabytes worth of these Zoom meetings. So yes, yeah, we'll have it all online. Logan or Lincoln, you guys have a game design idea or a question? Happy to help. All right, if I don't hear from you guys in like 30 or so seconds, I'll just assume that you're AFK and I'll end the recording so it doesn't get to be too huge a file for uploading. Otherwise, speak now or hold your peace till Monday. Oh, okay. I'll be uploading this whole thing and I'll type this response as well, just in case you can't hear it right now. So sorry to hear, man. I feel you. I've been having terrible, terrible internet connection problems at home with all this snowy weather. So it's not just you. So no worries. We'll get you all set up. All right. Hang in there, man. We'll get through this cold weather. You know, spring's coming. We'll see you on Monday.